Okay. Welcome everyone to our second session for Kabbalah for Litvaks, the Har'el Beit Midrash. What I would like to do, I'd like to welcome everybody, the people, especially the people who weren't here last time. I hope we were able to do some catching up. What I would like to talk about today, first, I'd like to just for a moment review what we talked about last time, and the fundamental concept which arose was that, broadly speaking, Kabbalah took the anthropomorphisms that we find in the Torah, understood them in a symbolic way rather than a metaphorical way, namely that there was some sort of meaning and something was actually being said about God in the anthropomorphisms. And we saw that this whole, that there were these anthropomorphic descriptions of God, that the symbols that the Torah used, or there's God's Yad Chazakah, or Ein Hashem, and things like that, actually do allude to things that have to do with God. And we saw that in the Sefirot Bahir, we saw it in the Ramban al Torah. What I would like to do today, first of all, we have to remember that basic assumption, and I would like to see some primary sources with regards to the Sefirot, how we understand the Sefirot, and what that tells us about the relationship between God and the world, and ourselves and God. So the first source which I would like to see here is from the Sefer Yetzirah. Now, the Sefer Yetzirah, it's not clear exactly when it was written. There are those that think that it's from the time of Chazal or the end of the period of Beit Sheni. Some hold that it was written in the 6th or the 7th centuries. Traditionally, it was attributed to either to Avram Avinu or to Adam HaRishon, and some people attribute it to Rabbi Akiva. In any case, it's a very old mystical work. I say mystical work, it's not exactly traditional Kabbalah, but there are some Kabbalistic concepts which later Mekubalim derived from Sefer Yetzirah. So in any case, let's see the first source here from Sefer Yetzirah. This is in Perek Aleph. There are two Breitot which I would like to look at. First here, this is the idea of the Sefirot. Okay? Eser Sefirot b'li ma b'mispar eser etzbaot. Okay, so again here we have, there's a lot here in this Sefer Yetzirah. We're not going to discuss everything that we can learn from these Breitot, but there are certain points which I want to bring out. So the first thing is that we say that there are Eser Sefirot b'mispar eser etzbaot. Again, as we saw in the Ramban al Torah when he talked about Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, that there is a parallel between the way human beings interact with the world, which is through the extremities of their body, their fingers and their toes, to the way God, so to speak, interacts with the world, and that is through the Eser Sefirot. We can think about Eser Sefirot as, say, aspects of God's personality as we perceive it. Okay? Well, let's just see first from the Sefer Yetzirah. So, Eser Sefirot b'li ma b'mispar eser etzbaot chamesh keneged chamesh. Sefirot can be organized in different ways. Now, we're not going to get into it now, but one way of organizing it, not the most common way, is to organize in two groups of 5. In general, the Sefirot are organized. Let's take a look at this. I'm going to scroll down here. You should be able to see this in a moment, to the map of the Sefirot, so to speak. Here we are. All right, they're generally divided into 3 groups, as you can see. Right, the right side, the left side, and the middle. Okay? That's how it's generally divided up. And here you have what they are. Okay, we might as well take a look. Keter, Chokhmah, Binah, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. These are the Sefirot. Now let's go back to to what we find in the Sefer Yetzirah. Scrolling back up here. So in the Sefer Yetzirah, so it says there are 10 Sefirot. Okay. Here we are again. So there are 10 Sefirot. Eser etzbaot, chamesh keneged chamesh, ubrit yichud mechuvenet ba'emtza. The brit, right, a covenant, is where we meet, right, where people meet and they form a covenant, where God meets human beings and there's a covenant, right? So we'll see, brit yichud mechuvenet ba'emtza, b'milat lashon u'b'milat hamaor. That in between the 10 fingers, I'm going to back up now so you can see what I'm going to do here. In between the 10 fingers, right, there's 10 fingers, right, is the lashon, right? So in the middle of my body is the lashon, and in between the 10 toes is the brit hamaor, the brit milah. Okay? Again, we have very powerful anthropomorphism. And why do we call brit hamilah and brit halashon? Why are they called a brit? Because this is where, in a sense, this is how we express ourselves in the world. Right? Everything, the Sefirot are, if you talk about the higher Sefirot, Chokhmah, Binah, and Da'at, Sefirot that have to do with consciousness, and then the lower Sefirot, the 7 lower Sefirot, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, they have to do with the world of emotion, and then it gets expressed. You have this whole process that goes around inside a human being, and it gets expressed. How does it get expressed? We express ourselves through our words. That's Brit Halashon. That's where the person expresses themselves in their surroundings. That's the Brit Halashon. And of course, the way a person expresses themselves in relationship to another person sexually is through Brit Hamaor. Right? So that's what we have here in the first Braita, the 10 Sefirot, which remind us, and the Keneged Eser Etzbaot, with the points of contact with the world or with the other through the Brit Halashon and Brit Hamaor. Let's see this next Braita here. Eser Sefirot Belima Midatan Eser She'ein Lehem Sof. So somehow these 10 are connected to infinity. Okay? Na'utz Sofan B'tchilatan U'tchilatan B'sofan Kishalhevet Kshura B'gachelet. They are connected to each other. The beginning is connected to the end, and the end is connected to the beginning. What that means, there are different ways of interpreting this. I think the simplest way of interpreting it is that you can talk about it in terms of cause and effect. So the first Sefirah, which is keter, is where desire or will is stirred, and the culmination of that is in the last Sefirah of Malchut. So you can talk about cause and effect. The will is the cause, and the effect in the world is Malchut. So a cause, in order to be defined as a cause, needs an effect, and an effect, in order to exist, needs a cause. So they're mutually dependent. Okay? But that's not really our issue here. But when we say here, Kishalhevet Kshura B'gachelet, the relationship between the Sefirot and God is by metaphor the way a flame is connected to the coal. So the way it's connected is you can't really touch the coals. The coal is black. If you don't even see the coal, what you see is the light and the heat, the energy that is connected to the coal. That connection is somewhat of a mystery. Okay? What the Sefer Yetzirah already is saying is that the connection between the way we perceive God and God himself is a mystery. Now, let's look at the next line. This is very important. Sha'adon yachidhu ve'ein sheni lo v'lifnei echad ma'ata sofer. What is this sentence saying? We just said that there are 10 Sefirot. And then it says, Sha'adon yachidhu, but the master is unique, ve'ein sheni lo, and there is no second to him. But we just said there were 10. So what this line is referring to is what later came to be known, to be referred to as the Ein Sof. There are 10 Sefirot, but the Adon is above that, and he's not part of any number. Okay? Lifnei echad ma'ata sofer. Right, so there's something before the first Sefirah, which we call the Ein Sof, which is transcendent. Okay? So what we have here, you could say the 10 Sefirot are a projection of God's personality, so to speak. But there's, just like I have my personality, but then there's me behind that. And I'm more than just a collection of my personality characteristics. There's something transcendent about my identity. Right? That's the way Kant would put it, say, as opposed to Hume, where there's no transcendent self. There's just a connection. There's just this conglomeration of experiences. Right? But here, what the Sefer Yetzirah is saying about God is that there's a transcendent God that is beyond the 10 Sefirot. Right? Okay. Now, let's take a look. There's a way, perhaps another way of describing this is there's a saying that that's attributed to C.S. Lewis. I'm not sure if he really said it, but what the Sefer Yetzirah is saying, in a sense, is that the body is not the person. The expression of the presence of the person is not the person themselves. C.S. Lewis is supposed to have said, you don't have a soul, you are a soul. You have a body. Okay, so I think that's what is rooted in this last sentence in the Sefer Yetzirah. Sha'adon yachitu ve'ein sheni lo. It's not part of the Eser Sefirot. It's not his Eser Etzbaot. It's not the body. Ulefnei echad ma'ata sofer. But there's something transcendent which comes before the personality or what's perceived. Okay? As opposed to this, okay, let's take a look. The next source is the Shari Ora. Right, we saw the Shari Ora last week as well. The Shari Ora by Rav Yosef Jikatilia from the 13th century Spain. Here he talks about the Sefirah of keter. Okay? Sefirah of keter. V'Sefirah hazot nikret kedem. It's the first one. Okay? V'hineni miva'er. Now I'm going to explain. Da ki kodem briato shel olam ein bishum bria koach lidrosh v'lachkor lefnei hapargod lefisha pargod nin alefanav. So the things you can't know that come before creation. V'ki'ilu lo chas al kavod kono. Right? And that would be disrespectful, it would be almost blasphemous. וכבר אמרו פרק אין דורשים, למין היום אשר ברא אלוקים אדם על הארץ, יכול ישאל אדם קודם שנברא העולם? Is it possible to inquire about what came before the world? So no, you can't. Okay? אבל קודם לכן, before them, לא, you can't ask. לפי שספירת הכתר, the ספירה of keter, הנקראת אהיה, future tense. Kadma lakol, came first. Uba hayu kol hasfirot nichlalot v'nistarot kodem shenivra ha'olam. In keter, everything existed in potential before the world was created. Ukeshe'ala b'machshava levro ha'olam. And when God's thought was stirred, it's very interesting, this phrase, kishe'ala b'machshava. It doesn't say kishechashav, that would be active. Kishe'ala b'machshava, we'll see, sounds much more like an organic process. The thought emerged. Livro et ha'olam, nitgalu asfirot miseter haketer. So the creation is seen as a revelation of God. We'll talk about this in sessions that are coming up. If you read the Torah Shebechtav, creation is about creation of the physical world. But in Kabbalah, that creation is of secondary importance. The real creation is the revelation of God. Okay? So when the thought emerged to create the world, the Sefirot emerged from keter. Lefichach nikret kedem, and that's why it's called kedem, meaning the early one or the first one. Shehi kodemet lakol, shehi asfira asher mimena nitgalu sitrei asfirot. So the Sefirah of keter is different than other Sefirot in that it is the cause. It is the cause of the emanation. That the emanation begins from keter. What is missing from this description, and this is very, very important, there's no mention here of the Ein Sof as being the source, but rather the source is the first Sefirah. And this means that basically what you perceive of God is what there is. And it, in a sense, undermines what, for us, what we're used to thinking, especially after the Rambam, the transcendent aspect of God. That God is the Sefirot, rather than there's something transcendent, and that transcendence is in some mysterious way expressed in the world, but there's still something beyond the world. Right? This description moves in a pantheistic direction. It would be as if to say, or maybe it undermines the whole dichotomy between body and soul. But what you perceive of, say, the other, I talk about it in terms of interpersonal relations, and we said that it's justified to go back and forth with Tselem Elokim. It would be as if to say that when you get to know me and you know my personality, if you get to know me intimately, then that's what there is. There's nothing else that's mysteriously beyond what you can perceive of me. It doesn't mean that I'm necessarily an open book and I'm easy to understand, but basically what you see is what there is. Right? You may have to seek very deeply to see what there is, but it's all within human comprehension when you talk about God being encapsulated in the Sefirot themselves. Okay? Now, take this piece in the Shari Ora, and now let's compare this to the Zohar. Okay? I'm going to scroll down. Now we're going to see, we're going to do a piece from the Zohar. Okay? This is a Hebrew translation of the Zohar by Professor Yeshaya Tishby, and the book is called Mishnat HaZohar, where he took selections of the Zohar. It's a 2-volume selection of the Zohar together with essays. It was put together back in 1949 in Yerushalayim. So this is a very important Zohar. Let's go through let's just see this. he starts with the description of the Esser, this Zohar starts with the description of the Esser Sefirot, okay? Which we're going to go through quickly now. We're going to come back to it, but right now let's go through this quickly. Ve'elu Esser Sefirotein holchot kisidran. These 10 Sefirot go according to a specific order. Achat aruka v'achat ktsara v'achat beinonit. In other words, there are Sefirot which are expansive, there are Sefirot which are restricted, and then there are Sefirot which sort of mediate between them. We don't have to get into that right now. And then it says what they are. Right, I'm skimming down a little bit, and it says Chesed Zroa Yamin, Gvura Zroa Smol, Teferet Guf, Netzach V'Hod Shtei Shokayim. Right, there's the Sefirot which are made analogous to the human body. Okay? After it goes through the Sefirot, it says as follows: Ribon ha'olamim, the second paragraph. Ribon ha'olamim, atahu ilat ha'ilot, sibat ha'sibot. You are the reason are the prime cause, the cause of causes, right? Hamashke et ha'ilan b'mabua. You nurture the tree, namely the ilan of the Sefirot, from the spring, from the well, from the source. This is saying that the source, the life source of the Sefirot are outside the Sefirot. Okay? This is very similar to what we saw in the Sefer Yetzirah, where the Zohar is saying that even though we describe the Sefirot as emanating from God, but God himself is beyond the Sefirot. Atahu ilat ha'ilot, sibat ha'sibot, hamashket ha'ilan b'mabua, voto mabua, that source, who can neshama laguf, shehi chayim laguf. So he's saying that, in a sense, now we have another way of describing the Sefirot. The Sefirot would be like the body, and the source of what gives life to the body, it comes from the Ein Sof. Right? That would be the neshama. Nobody can see my neshama. I can't even see my neshama. But it's evident in the fact that I'm alive. Through the expression of my life, you can understand that I have a neshama. But that neshama remains transcendent. Right? Shehi chayim laguf. Ubecha ein dimayon ve'ein dmut. When we talk about the Ein Sof, there's nothing you can say about it. Right? Here we're coming close to the Rambam, actually. Mikol ma shebifnim v'shebachutz. Meaning, you can't describe it with any physical attributes. That's shebachutz. And you can't even describe it with spiritual attributes, and that's shebifnim. But what we have in the Zohar, which is similar to what we saw in the Sefer Yetzirah, but is different than what we just saw in the Shari Ora, is that there's God, there's the Ein Sof, there's some divine essence, which is beyond the Sefirot. Whereas according to Rabbi Yosef Jekatilia in the Shari Ora, that distinction is blurred, and God is part of the system of the Sefirot. And that is a very significant question, because it has to do with what the relationship between our perceptions of God and God himself. In other words, if I say that there's an Ein Sof, right, but I don't perceive the Ein Sof, I basically perceive God through the Sefirot. And what I'm saying is, my perceptions of God, when I experience beauty in the world and I perceive God through that beauty, or when I perceive tragedy in the world and I perceive an angry God through the tragedy, etc., I'm not really perceiving God. Where that perception originates from is a question, but I'm not really perceiving God. Maybe in some mysterious way it's connected to God, but I'm not perceiving God. But if I say that God is part of the system of the Sefirot itself, then my perceptions, when I perceive God, I'm perceiving God. Right? In other words, it brings God much closer if you obscure the distinction between keter and Ein Sof. Right? Now let's go back and explore some of the imagery that is used in order to help, let's say, wrap our minds around the idea of the Sefirot. So I haven't really explained it. I don't think I've explained it. Okay? So let's see the Shari Ora, the second source in the Shari Ora, which is here. Okay. The Shari Ora talks about the name of God. Right? And the names of God are connected to the Sefirot. But before we read the Shari Ora, I just want to mention a Sfat Emet. Right? Actually, in this week's Parsha, in Parshat Shmot, he says something very interesting about names. Sefer Shmot is a book which is called a Book of Names. So he says on the Pasuk, Ve'ele Shmot B'nei Yisrael hayordim Mitzrayma. So he says, only the Shemot of B'nei Yisrael yardu Mitzrayma. The B'nei Yisrael themselves lo yardu Mitzrayma. So what does that mean? Saying that a name is the way a person is perceived in the world. A name is connected to the world of perceptions and appearances. So it appeared, we're going to make some sense out of this. It sounds pretty crazy, actually. It only appeared that Bnei Yisrael went down to Mitzrayim, but in essence, they never went down to Mitzrayim. They were still connected to Yaakov Avihem and Eretz Canaan. That's what the Sfat Emet says. That only their names went down to Egypt, and they themselves didn't go down to Egypt. But if we think about it, even though it sounds rather strange, it really isn't. Because a person is, where is a person really? Right? It was one of the British poets said, iron bars do not a prison make. Right? That I may appear to be imprisoned and subjugated, but inside, if my spirit is free, then I'm free. All you have to read, for example, I remember Sharansky's book, Fear No Evil. Right? So he was, even though he was physically in prison, he was really free. That, in a sense, is what the Sfat Emet is saying, that a name is only an appearance, a projection of the person. And then, of course, it means that a name of a person can be misleading, right? In the case of Eile Shmot B'nei Yisrael Yardu Mitzrayma, that it's only their names, it's only an appearance. So a name obscures the true reality. But on the other hand, sometimes a name actually facilitates understanding reality. So a name both is an expression of essence and may obscure at the same time. Okay? So this is true of people's names, and it's also true of God's name. There's something in God's name, or the names that we use to describe God, which on the one hand obscures reality, the divine reality, but on the other hand reveals it. So now, with that little introduction, let's see what the Shari Ora says here. He talks here, this chapter talks about the Sefira of Chachma, and he talks about the relation between Chachma and Bina. Let's just see. Hashem Atshei Mishemot HaKodesh Hu HaNikra Yud Hei. Okay? Sarich ata ladat ki Hashem HaGadol Shehu Yud Hei Vav Hei Yitbarach Hu HaNikra Shem HaMiyuchad. That's the unique name. four-letter name. Tomar, Sod HaYichud Kol Eser Sefirot Ka'achat. The name Yud Hey Vav Hey somehow alludes to all the 10 Sefirot. How is this? Let's read through this piece and then we'll go back and explain. Kvar be'arnu ki shtei ha-Sefirot harishonot, the first two Sefirot, namely keter and chokhmah, klulot ba'ot yud shel shem hamiyuchad. That's the yud. The kutso shel yud, the crown of the yud, sod ha-keter. That's keter. The kutso shel yud is, on the one hand, connected to the yud, but it's above the yud. Right? In the same way, the keter, we'll see, is connected to chokhmah, but it's above chokhmah. The ikar ha-yud, but the yud itself, sod ha-chokhmah. That's chokhmah. Okay? We'll try to give meaning to this, but first we have to go through the source. Okay? V'asfira ha-shlishit, the third sfira, bina, mit'achedet b'shteihen. It brings together chokhmah. It absorbs chokhmah. Ki sod habina. That's what bina is. Haklula b'sod, which is embodied in the esoteric understanding. B'sod hey rishona shel shem. That's the first hey in the Shem Havaya. So he has the Yud is Chachma, and the Hey is Bina. Okay? Nimtzu shtei otiyot shel Shem, shteihen klulot begimel Sefirot Elyonot. So the Yud is the Keter and Chachma, and the Hey is Bina. So the first two letters of God's name, Yud Hey, is Keter, Chachma, and Bina. Okay? I haven't explained anything yet. Okay, but okay. The ot vav, the letter vav, the third letter of God's name, al shem shel shem, he kolelet sheish sfirot. Right, vav is 6. Okay, so there are 6 sfirot. What is the 6 sfirot? Chesed, gvura, tiferet, netzach, hod, yisod. Okay, gimel mechatzi ot vav ulemala. The Eluhein Gdula Gvura Tiferet, right? 3 above, right? Gdula Gvura is Chesed and Gvura Tiferet. Gimel Mechetzi Ot Vav Ulemata. The Eluhein Netzach Hod Yisod. Okay? Va'asfira Chrona Shel Shem. Shia Sirit, the last Sfira is Malchut. Kula Ba'ot Achrona Shel Shem Shehi Ot Hey. That's the last. So what is he saying? I want to stress. I haven't explained anything yet. Okay? Just have to be a little patient. He says that the four-letter name of God is, in a sense, a description of the creative process, which begins with keter and goes down to malchut. So we have the yud and the hey and the vav and the hey are, let's not talk about keter for a minute. So you have chachma and then bina, and then the vav is the next 6 sfirot, and then you have the last hey, which is malchut. Okay, what does this mean? All right, so let's take it step by step. Let's talk about chachma and bina, and now I want to remind everyone about the fact that we're created b'tselem Elokim, and the way to understand what the Zohar or what the Shari Ora are talking about is to talk about human creativity and see how that works, and then project that back onto God. Okay? So let's talk about chachma. So chachma is the yud. Yud is a point. It's known as the first point. If I would ask, right, say the Mekubalim Adoresh, that the first Sefirah is Chokhmah, it says Bereshit bara Elokim, Reshit is Chokhmah, Reshit Chochma Yirat Hashem. So the Reshit, the first Sefirah, which is actually revealed, and keter is sort of not exactly revealed. Keter is where it comes from, right? But the first Sefirah which is revealed is Chochma. And they say that's Chochma me'ayin timatzeh. If I would ask you, right, when you have an idea, what's the beginning of a creative process in a human being? You have some sort of idea in your mind. Where do you experience that idea coming from? Now, I'm not interested in psychological or neurological explanations, right, that it comes from your subconscious. I want to know where its experience is coming from. And if you think about it, when you have an idea, the first almost elusive moment when an idea dawns upon you, it's experienced as coming out of nowhere. We say, it just popped into my head out of nowhere. That is the meaning of Chochma me'ayin timatzeh. The Chochma comes from the ayin. And that is how the Mekubalim interpret Bria Yesh Me'ayin, creation from nothing. The creation from nothing is that moment when you have an idea which seems to come out of nowhere. That's Bria Yesh Me'ayin. Okay? And that's creation of God's revelation as well. Because it happened, the reason, in a sense, we can talk about it this way, is the chicken and the egg, is because it's like this in God and we're created in God's image, right? And we perceive ourselves, when we turn the spotlight away from God and onto ourselves, and we think, how do we create? The first thing I contemplate is, where did I get the idea from? And it seems that it popped into my head out of nowhere. And that is Chochma me'ayin timatzeh, and that is the meaning of Bria Yesh Me'ayin according to this model, to this way of thinking. Okay? Now, so we have this first idea. Right? Now, this idea, in order for it to become more tangible, in order for it to, we say in Hebrew, we would say, likrom or v'gidim, in order for it to actually become physical. And likrom or v'gidim is a very important phrase here, because we talk about gestation. Let's just, for a moment, take a look. I want to talk about this way of talking about it. The next source here is in the Sefirot Chaim. The Sefirot Chaim is Reb Chaim Vital, who basically, it's the source for the Kitvei Ha'arizal. So he says as follows. Okay, this is from Tzfat in the 16th century. V'hinei ka'asher Abba ve'ima, that's Aleph Vav Aleph. Ka'asher Abba ve'ima mizdagvim, when they have relations, hinei zulat hachesed va'gvura, right? That's chesed v'gvura, shekiblu kanal. Hinei Abba motzi tipa mimochin shelo, v'nikra chochma, v'ima motzi tipa hanekret bina, v'chol elu mitarvim b'me'ei ima. The description here is sexual. And the truth is, it makes perfect sense, because we talk about creative process. Human beings create other human beings through sexual relations. So what's described here, Chochma, is the tipa mimochin. Chochma is the zera, is the semen. We even talk about it this way in all languages. I don't know all languages. I know English. What do we say? We have a seminal idea. Right? So this is, the Abba is motzi tipa mimochin shelo, the nikra chokhmah, the beginning, the seed of the idea, the seminal idea is still elusive. The Ima, right, this is the primordial womb, right, collects the tipa, and that's Bina. V'chol elu mitarvim b'me'ei Ima. What happens is that Chachma impregnates the primordial womb, and that later gives birth to the next Sefirot. But hold on one second. Let's look at it this way. The Yud, now go back to the Shem Havaya. Right? The Yud, if it's Chokhmah, is the Tipa, is the seminal idea. The seminal idea leads to conception when we talk about concepts. Right? So you have a seminal idea, and you have a concept, right? Because the idea has begun to become unpacked, right? And it begins to develop. The Yud of the Shem Havaya is the seminal idea, and the Hey, which follows the Yud in the Shem Havaya, is basically a Dalid with a Yud in it. Dalid is emptiness, is understood to be Dalat, as in Dal, empty. Okay? So you have the Dalid is the empty womb. The Yud from the Shem, from the first Yud of the Shem Havaya, enters the Dalid, impregnates the Dalid, it becomes a Hey. The Hey is a pregnant Dalid. The Yud has entered the Dalid and has become a Hey. So that is Bina, and that is the mother. So the first creation in the Sefirot is when the seminal idea becomes a concept, or when Chachma impregnates the aim and becomes Bina. And then it begins to become differentiated. Okay? And then Bina gives birth to the next 6 Sefirot, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, which is called Zer Anpin. Just one second. I'm going to scroll down now to the diagram that we had before. Okay. I hope you can see it. Okay. You have Chachma impregnates Bina, and then the next 6 Sefirot, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, are called Zer Anpin, Panim Tanim. It's a small person, right? Where Chesed is the right hand, Gvura is the left hand, Tiferet is the torso, Netzach is the right thigh, the right leg, Hod is the left leg, Yesod is the male sexual organ, and Malchut is the woman. But the birth is to the Vav of the 6 Sefirot, and the Vav is male, because you don't have to be Freud to realize that Vav also serves as a phallic symbol, being representative of the male organ, which all comes down to Yesod. Right? So you have Chachma impregnates Bina, that gives birth to Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, and all that then has relations with Malchut, and that's Yichud Kutchabrichu Shrinta. That's the description here of the creative process as it's expressed in God's name. The Yud impregnates the Dalid, becomes a Hey. The Hey gives birth to the Vav, and then the Vav in turn is Mizdaveg with the second Hey, and that becomes with the Dalid, and that becomes a Hey again. In the Kitab of the Arizal, when they write the Shem Havaya, in the second Hey, what normally is the Yud part of the Hey is actually drawn as a small Vav rather than a Yud. Right? What emerges from this is something very interesting. I think it's very, very important to realize this. It's a totally different model of creation than what we're used to. Because if you read I remember when my daughter was 2, 3 years old, and my wife was pregnant with the second one. So when I was putting my daughter to sleep, this is like more than 20 years ago, and she said, right once we were all in Hashem's tummy, and I thought to myself, whoa. Okay. I said, right. Because the description, but this is not the description that we get from when you read Torah Shebektav. When you read the story of Bereshit. The story of Bereshit, God says, Yehi or, Vayhi or, etc. Because it's a male model of creation, where males create outside themselves by an act of will. That is the way God is described in Torah Shebektav as creating. We don't talk, it's a I think Kaufman writes about this, it's a demythification. There's nothing said about God, there's just will. I'd call there's a very important book called Before Philosophy by, Frankfurt. It was the first, written by the first archaeologists who explored the Middle East back in the 1920s. So he talks about how the Bible replaces the ancient myths of Mesopotamia and Egypt or the way he describes it, with an overarching myth, the myth of the will of God. In other words, we stop talking about what's going on inside of God, but we just talk about God. The anthropomorphism which we do allow ourselves, in a sense, is that God has a will. Right? And that's what comes out. You read Sefer Bereshit in a straightforward way. God creates by an act of will. So there's God over there, and the world is created by God. So you have God over there and the world over here. Okay? That's a male model of creation. The female model of creation is organic. The creation flows from inside. There's a gestation. So what Kabbalah, what the Ma'arefet HaSefirot does, right, it takes a biological creative process and it translates it into the world of God and creation. So God now is not seen as this transcendent being that creates as an act of will, which is the simple way of understanding the story of Bereshit, but rather it's an emergence of God himself. So in a sense, the story of creation is the story of revelation. You can even put it this way, that in the story of creation, God gives birth to himself. Because you have parts of you have the Yud impregnating the Hey and giving birth to the Vav, which again has relations with the last Hey. So you have basically this drama of God revealing himself in an organic way, and there's the connection, therefore, that he has with the world, rather than seeing him as separate from the world and acting upon it as, by virtue of some sort of authority and will, which is supernatural. The relationship between God is now seen as a more natural process. There's, even if you take the Zohar or the Sefer Yetzirah, where the Ein Sof is separate from the Sefirot, but nonetheless there does seem to be some sort of organic connection in a mysterious way, the way you have a flame, the way the flame is connected to the coal, but there is some sort of natural flow that occurs, right, which is modeled after Tselem Elokim. And the best example of that, the example that I stress now, is really the relationship between Chachma and Bina, and where we actually perceive the first initial primal ideas that we have. Where do we perceive them as coming from? They sort of pop into our heads out of nowhere, and that's why we can talk about Bria Yesh Me'ayin is coming out of nowhere, because the idea that popped in, that God had to create the world, so to speak, that also seemed to pop into God's mind out of nowhere. And that's where keter is. That's where the keter comes in. This keter is something outside of the body. It touches, right? The king, the keter, the crown touches the king's head, but it's not inside his head. But there's something outside. We sense that it comes from outside of ourselves. Okay, so to sum up what we saw today, we saw the idea of the Sefirot, personality characteristics, so to speak, of God, which are modeled after how we understand ourselves. We talked about the relationship between the Sefirah of keter and the Sefirah and Ein Sof, where the Zohar alludes to Ein Sof after they talk about the Sefirah, after it talks about the Sefirot, and the Sefer Yetzirah talks about a transcendent God, Ein Sof, you could say, that comes before the Sefirot. Whereas in Yosef Jekatilia, he seems to blur that distinction. And that's very, very important in terms of understanding whether there's anything, whether there's an aspect of God which is beyond what we perceive. Now, the truth is, even though we're used to thinking, probably, again, as a consequence of the Rambam, is that of course there's a transcendent God which is beyond our comprehension and it's outside of the picture, right? But if you just look in Tanakh, I looked, I'm sure you've looked, there's no Ilat HaIlot mentioned in Tanakh, and there's no Ein Sof mentioned in Tanakh. As we said in our first session, there's a God who's there. There's a God who's there, who's all powerful, who knows everything, and he has expectations, and he has emotions, he has desires, he has disappointments, and he gets angry, and he loves, right? And that's the God that we have in Tanakh. So in a sense, Jekatilia is more faithful to that conception of God, as opposed to talking about, okay, everything that's in Tanakh, that's the God, the way the Zohar would say, or the way the Sefer Yetzirah would say it, was that's the God of the Sefirot. Right? But we, of course, know that there's something else out there that doesn't really appear in Tanakh. But I thought that Tanakh is supposed to tell me about God. All right, so that's what really has to get worked out here. And this goes to the core of what the nature of our religious experiences is. When we experience God's presence, can we say that there really is something of God in that presence that we're perceiving? Or not? Then what is it? It's some sort of projection that God puts out there, the way an actor on a stage plays a role but doesn't reveal anything of themselves. Right? So that's just a question that we all have to grapple with. Okay, so we'll stop here. Let me just see if there are any questions. If anybody typed in any questions. Let's see. Is there any questions? Okay, I don't see that anybody asked any questions right now. All right, please feel free to